Now let's come to a story both closer to and further from home. India and its space sector. A new report is out. It says India's space industry could hit $100 billion by 2040. $100 billion. It's a staggering number. It would have been inconceivable some 50 years ago. That's when India's space journey began in the year 1969. India grew, beating all expectations. The more the world disted, the higher it aimed. Today, India's space industry is growing twice as fast as the rest of the world, and it's using this growth for global good. Our next report tells you more.
3, 2, 1, 0.
What do you think of when you hear the term India's space sector? Perhaps the Indian Space Research Organization, also known as ISRO. Maybe you think of ISRO's recent Chandrayaan-3 lunar mission that's trying to land on the south side of the moon as we speak. Or perhaps the regular satellite launches from Indian installations, often for other nations. Since 1999, India has launched 381 satellites for 34 countries, and that has brought in about $279 million. So India has been making a name for itself in the commercial space race. Both the scientific and commercial Indian space ventures have been growing by leaps and bounds. And the commercial in particular is gaining global recognition. A report has just been released by Arthur D. Little. It's a consultancy firm headquartered in Belgium, and it predicts phenomenal growth in India's space industry. The report says India's space sector could reach revenues of $100 billion by 2040. That's the best case scenario. At the very least, the space sector could bring in $40 billion annually by the end of the next decade. These are very encouraging numbers. India's space industry generates about $8 billion in revenue at present. So it is predicted to grow anywhere between 5 to 12.5 times in the next 18 years. That's a minimum prediction of 5-fold growth, going up to 12.5 times. It's far ahead of the rest of the world. At the very least, India's space sector is expected to grow at twice the global average, which it's already doing. India's space sector currently grows at about 4% annually compared to the world average of 2%. So the country is already outperforming the world. If it just stays on its present course, India's space sector should hit $40 billion by 2040. But in order to max out its growth, India needs to change a few things. According to Arthur D. Little, to hit $100 billion in space revenue, India can do the following things. Enact clear and comprehensive space regulations, strengthen space equipment manufacturing capabilities, encourage foreign investments in satellite facilities, use production-linked incentives to become a satellite manufacturing hub, collaborate with international companies through joint ventures and acquisitions, support early-stage space startups, and build a skilled workforce to work in the space sector. It's a lot of work. But India seems keen to put in the effort to modernize. The Indian space sector is already opening up to privatization. Earlier this month, India began a bidding process for the manufacturing and development of the SSLV rocket program. SSLV stands for Small Satellite Launch Vehicle. These are relatively low-cost rockets that can be used to launch lightweight satellites. They were designed by ISRO and will eventually be made by private companies. So far, 20 firms have reportedly expressed interest in the SSLV manufacturing deal, which means the move to the next stage of India's space industry is underway. The country's space sector has come a long way since its humble beginnings in 1969. Back then, the world didn't believe India could do it. After all, India was a country with tremendous poverty. It was always extremely talented, blessed with some of the best scientific minds. People like Vikram Sarabhai, Homi J. Bhabha and APJ Abdul Kalam, among a host of others. But despite this, no one thought India could fulfill its lofty dreams. And so, no nation really offered to help. Fast forward to about 50 years later, and we get this Arthur D. Little report. Now this is just one report, And India still has a lot to do to achieve its goals. But finally, it seems the world is waking up to its immense potential.
Our next story is about the global arms bazaar. It could see a shake-up soon. New challenges are rising to take on the incumbents. Tonight we focus on South Korea. South Korea wants to be a major arms dealer, and today it took one step closer to that goal. A South Korean firm has won a contract. The name of this company is XINHUA Aerospace. It has won a deal to build infantry fighting vehicles. And who is the buyer? The Australian Army. They will pay at least $3.4 billion for 129 infantry fighting vehicles.
This is one of the largest projects in the history of the Army. The cost will be subject to detailed negotiations, but is expected to be between $5 and $7 billion.
Now, this is a big deal. It's been called a historic agreement, and I'll tell you why. It is for the first time that an Asian company has bagged a defense deal from Australia. Although XINHUA Aerospace is not a new player, it is South Korea's largest defense contractor. And this was not an easy bid to win. There was another formidable player in the mix, Germany's Rheinmetall. Again, a well-established player. The bidding went down to the wire. Australia's opposition personally endorsed Rheinmetall, the German company. But Canberra decided to go the other way. And they realized this might not sit well with Berlin. Rheinmetall said it was disappointed. An Australian minister tried to contain the damage. He said Australia will keep talking with Germany. Let me quote from what he said. We'll continue to engage with the government of Germany on that. We are very hopeful that will continue. And that may continue. But in this round, Berlin has lost to Seoul. A few years ago, this would have been hard to imagine. Australia choosing Asian weapons over Western hardware. But it's happening. This deal signals intent. South Korea wants to become a major arms supplier. In recent years, there have been a bunch of big deals. In 2021, Seoul's defense exports doubled from about $3.2 billion to close to $7 billion, 2021. Then 2022 was a banner year. Do you know how much business South Korea did? Last year, they earned more than $17 billion from weapons exports. So the sales doubled again. And let me say this, Seoul is not even selling weapons to Ukraine. South Korean weapons have their own market. How did this happen? How did South Korea take this lead in the global arms bazaar? Well, this is a story of self-reliance. South Korea began building up its defense industry in the 1970s. The decision was primarily driven by fear. Seoul was worried about the North. It wanted to keep its guard up against Pyongyang. It also did not want to depend on powers like the US all the time and beyond a point. So the government invested in defense sectors. Weapon makers were given generous loans and tax breaks. A new industrial policy was introduced. It encouraged development of sectors which promoted the concept of dual use, meaning technology that can be used for civilian purposes and for military. These were areas like steel making, shipbuilding, and electronics. Dual use. All of them have military applications. And that's how South Korea built up its defense industry. Now they're making money off it. Korean K-2 tanks, Chunmoo rocket launchers, K-9 self-propelled howitzers, and the F-A-50 fighter aircraft are much sought after in the international market. And which countries are buying these weapons? The Philippines, Indonesia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Poland. XINHUA Aerospace, the company that just bagged the deal in Australia, is a giant. It is well known for its howitzers. These guns command a 55% share of the global market, 55%. So South Korea is a serious player. And also a good case study for India, because Seoul is on course to becoming a formidable competitor for New Delhi. You see, India too is trying to ramp up its defense exports, and Korea presents a challenge. I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, Malaysia announced a deal. It decided to buy 18 South Korean fighter jets. The deal was worth $920 million. Guess who else was trying to bag it? India. New Delhi had made a pitch for the Tejas. These jets are made by the state-owned company HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. And India's pitch was quite attractive. Reports say, along with the jets, India also offered to set up a maintenance, repair and overhaul complex. They also offered aviation management courses. And they were ready to sign up to make some parts of the jet in Malaysia. All of it was on offer, but the Malaysians were not sold. To them, the Korean offer seemed better, and they took it. And to be honest, India still has a lot of catching up to do, but they must do it fast. You see, the global arms bazaar is opening up. There are more opportunities than before. And there is space for countries like India and South Korea. They provide effective weapons, comparable technology at competitive prices. But there is less time to fully capitalize on this opportunity. If India wants to compete seriously, it must watch out for the Koreans.
XINHUA news agency has released information on this issue. You can check it out. The information on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is updated in accordance with relevant management regulations. Next question. The relevant decisions of the 4th session of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress and the order of the President of the People's Republic of China are very clear. You can refer to them. I have no information to provide on this question. Next question.
Foreign Minister, could you...
I have no information to provide. I still recommend you to check the news released by XINHUA news agency.
From China's Foreign Minister.
I have already answered this question. Information is on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We update it according to the relevant management regulations. I have no information to provide. Next question. I have no information to provide. Next question.
Next question, please.
I have already introduced the relevant situation. Next question. XINHUA news agency has released the news, but I don't have any more information. Next question.
It's the new Houdini Act. Forget escaping from a tank of water or pulling out rabbits from your hat. China has just pulled off the greatest magic trick ever. Their foreign minister has vanished. It's like he never existed. Just go to China's foreign ministry website, search Qinggang. You will get 0 results. President Xi Jinping has around 400 articles. Wang Yi has around 700 of them. Now, Wang Yi is Qinggang's predecessor and successor. You can see statements about his visits from the last decade. But all information on Qinggang has been purged. He's been erased from official records. If cameras did not exist, neither would Qinggang. We just showed you how the Chinese government is handling the situation. They have no answers to give, none whatsoever. Reporters posed around 20 questions. Every time the answer was the same. I have no information. Please refer to the media release. And what does this media release say? It has one sentence about Qinggang's sacking. It says he's been removed from the post of foreign minister. And now I don't know about China, but here in the real world, we have something called context. We like to know why and how things happen. The world still doesn't know the reason behind Qinggang's sacking. As a result, there is speculation. Some say he had an affair, that his alleged girlfriend recently gave birth in the US. Others say there is a corruption probe, that Qinggang was implicated in something shady. And finally, health concerns. Maybe Qinggang is sick. That's what the Chinese government said last month. But days later, he got the sack. The last time we saw him was on the 25th of June in Beijing. It's been more than a month. In this time, he's not just been sacked, he's also been missing. We are talking about a senior cabinet official here, the man in charge of China's foreign policy. How does someone like that disappear? Well, the answer is quite simple. Because the Chinese regime wants him to disappear. High-profile crackdowns are not uncommon in China. Businessmen and celebrities have vanished for months on end. They do turn up eventually, but by then they're very different people. More compliant, more loyal, and more silent, basically more communist. Could something similar happen to Xinjiang? The Foreign Ministry refuses to say. They claim they're opposed to malicious hype. Listen to this.
The relevant information on appointments and dismissals has been released in a timely manner from the Chinese side. We're always opposed to malicious hype surrounding this matter.
If only they could end all this hype and speculation. Well, they can. Just tell the world what happened. We know there is no point speculating about Xinjiang's disappearance, so let's focus on something else. What does this entire episode say about China? A, they're opaque and secretive, and B, they don't care what the world thinks. Both of these issues should ring alarm bells for the world. China is a country of 1.4 billion people. They make up 18% of the global GDP, around 15% of global trade. They have more than 400 nuclear warheads. They occupy a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Like them or hate them, you cannot ignore them. China's policies have a huge impact on global economy and politics. Xi Jinping has been open about his ambitions. He wants China to become a global superpower. But for that, he will need trust. Other countries must feel confident about China. And how do you do that? Certainly not by hiding your top diplomat. This sort of secrecy can have devastating consequences. We saw that during the Wuhan virus pandemic. They tried to hide the outbreak until the last moment. They kept lying about the virus, and that delay cost all of us. And that tells you how dangerous secrecy can be. Secondly, what is the world supposed to do now? Xinjiang met dozens of foreign ministers. He also visited India in March this year. I'm sure he had important conversations with Indian officials. Do those talks still matter? Or have they also been erased from China's memory? What about his policy initiatives? Do they still stand, or have they been forgotten as well? Do you see the problem here? This incident will erode whatever little trust China had left. If officials are so expendable, who do you negotiate with in Beijing? I guess Xi Jinping himself. But even the president has lost some of his credibility here. He handpicked this man, Xinjiang, sort of like his foreign policy protege. But within months, he's had to fire him and make him disappear. It's not a good look for the wise and all-knowing chairman, is it? Such incidents should be a cautionary tale for the world, a warning against Chinese superpowerdom. If it's the foreign minister today, it could be anyone tomorrow. Imagine all of us start trading in the yuan, the Chinese currency, and the next day China's central bank chief disappears. Good luck trying to limit the fallout then. The fact is, China needs to give some answers on what has happened. If the truth is unpalatable, maybe even try some propaganda. But stonewalling is not an option, because right now the fire-breathing dragon is a laughing stock. Does America know about aliens? Does it have proof about alien UFOs? And is it hiding that proof? I ask because a sensational claim is making waves. Listen to this.
UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine.
UFOs are real, he says, and no, this is not from a Hollywood film. This happened in the US Congress. This claim was made by a group of lawmakers. They were told that America knows about aliens, although, as you heard, he used a different term, non-human beings, also unidentified aerial phenomena. Trust Americans to be dramatic. They're talking about aliens and UFOs. And who are these speakers? Former members of the US defense establishment. They worked for the Pentagon. Some flew military planes. Others analyzed intelligence. This week, they appeared before American lawmakers from both parties. They're conducting hearings, apparently to find out the truth about aliens. So they've summoned witnesses, and these proceedings have attracted global interest for obvious reasons. We heard the testimonies. They're extraordinary. Take, for example, the testimony of a man called Ryan Graves. He's a former American Navy pilot. He told lawmakers about a training session. No dates were mentioned, but here's how the story goes. 2 F-18 Super Hornets were in the air. They were flying in formation. Suddenly, a UFO appeared. And what happened next? Why don't you hear it from the horse's mouth?
2 F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP. The object, described as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere, came within 50 feet of the lead aircraft and was estimated to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter. The mission commander terminated the flight immediately and returned to base.
He says UAP, that's unidentified anomalous phenomenon, what's more commonly called a UFO, unidentified flying object. So what happened after the pilots returned? Graves told American lawmakers that a safety report was submitted, and that's the last that he heard of it. He doesn't know if any action was taken on that report. But this is just one story. Apparently, there were more encounters and more mysterious events. Our next account is from a man called David Fravor. He's a retired U.S. Navy commander. He too delivered a testimony. Fravor was once flying an F-18 jet, and he noticed something strange.
As we looked around, we noticed that we saw some whitewater off our right side. It's important to note that the weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no whitecaps from waves. So the whitewater stood out in a large blue ocean. All four of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and Wizzo in the back seat, looked down saw a white tic-tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping-pong ball.
A small white object moving over the water like a ping-pong ball, he says. At the risk of sounding repetitive, let me remind you, this is not from a movie. All these testimonies happen in real life, and we saved the most sensational one for the last. The third witness, his name is David Grush. He's a former intelligence official. He worked in the U.S. Defense Department, that's their defense ministry, and what did he do there? He was on a task force about UFOs, so perhaps he knows better than all the others. And what did Grush say? He said America has had long-standing covert programs. Some date back to the 1930s. And he then went on to talk about aliens. He told lawmakers that the U.S. government has some materials, they are of quote-unquote non-human origin, and they were taken from some crash sites. Listen to this.
Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Again, this is on-record testimony, and Grush had more to say. He spoke about a reverse engineering program where crashed vehicles were tested. I have that statement with me. Listen to this. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access. So he did not see it for himself, but he claims the program did exist. And this is quite a claim. The Pentagon has been quick to rubbish it. They have, in fact, released a rebuttal. Let me quote from it. The Defense Department task force does not have any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently. In other words, the Pentagon says it does not know anything. But convincing the skeptics will be hard. Aliens and UFOs still sound like a far-fetched idea. And look at the careful choice of words. Non-human doesn't really mean alien. It could even be a plant or a sample of something else maybe. So there is still little tangible evidence except for videos like this one. These are unclassified videos. They were part of a U.S. intelligence report.
Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that, man. Look at it fly. Dude, that is a fucking drone, bro. Nickel 6-1 Tango Logic. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that, man. Look at it fly.
So what are those flying objects? The U.S. government said they do not know. In 2021, they released a report. It said there are no extraterrestrial links to these objects. So there is simply too little information to make a decision. But American lawmakers were not satisfied. They saw this as a cover-up, so they called for these hearings, and it has stirred up the hornet's nest again. Do aliens exist? Honestly, we don't know. And if you ask me, there are far bigger and more urgent questions that we need to answer first. And now let me tell you about IST. For the rest of the world, this refers to Indian Standard Time. But I'll let you in on a little secret. We Indians have a slightly different definition for it. To us, IST is Indian Stretchable Time. For instance, if you're invited to an Indian wedding at 8 p.m., it will probably begin at 10:30 p.m. and I'm being generous with the timing here. It's almost like a mutual understanding. We're all on the same page, much like tardy telepathy. But let me clarify, we aren't the only latecomers. People across the world struggle with being on time. According to a survey, 12% people are late to work at least twice a week. 12%. Running late is the only exercise many people get. Now, American Gen Z is proud to be part of this club, and Gen Z, being Gen Z, even has a word for it. It's called time blindness. It's popping up across the American workforce. People are showing up late to work, then requesting that their time blindness be accommodated. As expected, this has received mixed responses. But before I get to that, what is time blindness? It refers to a skewed sense of understanding time. Time blind people either under or overestimate the time a task will take. To them, time is just an immeasurable chunk. Frankly, it sounds bizarre. Is time blindness even a real thing? Well, here's what the experts say. Time blindness could be a symptom of a mental health issue. Like with people who have ADHD, they can become hyper-focused on an activity and lose track of time. But very few psychologists treat time blindness as a mental condition by itself. They say time blind people should not be given special treatment. I know. There goes your chance of using it as an excuse. Time blindness is basically a fancy word for being perpetually late. Points for creativity, sure, but it's kind of like saying that you have phobe. That's the fear of being early, F-O-B-E. It's not a real thing, at least not yet. We made it up. Just an excuse to avoid arriving too early at a party. Fear of being early and losing your street cred. And that's really the reason why people are late to things. So why are they? Why are people late? A Washington University study says being late is genetic. Some studies blame childhood experiences. People often mimic their parents' tardiness or even rebel against overly punctual parents. There is no winning this, right? Science also says that some people are hardwired to be late. They function on autopilot mode. Others like playing crisis maker. Such people need an adrenaline rush to get going. Sometimes lateness is a product of sheer optimism. People underestimate the traffic, for instance, then sleep through every one of their 10 alarms. If time isn't your friend, maybe you can relate to one of these reasons. But for those who are punctual, these are simply excuses with an element of selfishness. For instance, people are late for dinner with friends, but how come they arrive on time for job interviews or flights? It's a fair question. And the time-challenged are likely to face it regularly. After all, our world considers it a moral virtue to be on time. There is a whole industry dedicated to timeliness. According to some reports, it's worth more than $90 billion. It enthusiastically offers analog clocks, digital clocks, alarm clocks, timers, planners, self-help books, articles, even motivational posters, the kind that say, Taylor Swift has the same 24 hours in a day that you do. And people buy into this. They don't just strive to be punctual, they also demand it regularly, especially from their airlines. And this Brazilian airline is the most punctual in the world. It was on time 89% of the times. Haneda Airport in Japan is a proud member of the Efficiency Club. It's the most punctual airport in the world, and for all the jokes that we crack about IST, Kempe Gowda International Airport in India is the second most punctual one. The next three most punctual airports are in the US. But that's not all. We even expect punctuality from our trains. Some countries take it a little too far, though. In 2017, for instance, a Japanese rail company issued an apology because its train left 20 seconds early. It is odd. But as I said, punctuality is seen as a virtue, at least in many societies. Germany, Britain, France, Switzerland, and Japan are meticulously punctual. whereas many Latin cultures and Asian countries like India and China practice flexible time. But even in these countries, latching on to the time blindness trend will not fly. Being fashionably late is hardly ever in fashion, but then again, people just can't help it. Some are born late, some achieve lateness, and others have lateness thrust upon them. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with the United States. A burning crane came crashing down from a high rise in Manhattan. The crane was carrying 16 tons of concrete. 2 firefighters and at least 9 other people have been injured. Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell just experienced the longest 19 seconds of his life. So did everyone else in the room. No, they did not do a plank together. McConnell went abruptly quiet in the middle of a news conference. Everyone was confused. He was then escorted away, and when he came back, he said he was fine. In London, tiger cubs had a fun time in a zoo. They soaked in the sun, chilled on a swing, and called it a day. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1953, the Korean armistice was signed, ending the 3-year-long war. The Korean Civil War began in 1950. The 3-year-long bloody struggle left millions of people dead. The two countries never really signed a peace deal. So they're technically still at war. With that, we call it a wrap. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
This week has been good bipartisan cooperation and a string of
Okay, Mitch. Anything else you want to say, or should we just go back to you?